Another important tactic is, in addition to those think tanks and the like kind of true, kind of not scientific reports, are the use of media spin doctors. They're people who are chosen for their ability to speak well and present well, and they're wonderful at convincing people. They're those people that you see on the other side of the discussion that are shouting louder, and regardless of how you feel on climate change, you're like, wow, they're incredibly compelling because they're speech writers and they are trained to give excellent speeches and get people on their side. They're very persuasive. An example of one of these people is Marc Morano. If you watch a documentary called The Corporation, he talks about how he uses these strategies to try and convince people because this is what he is paid to do. It's not because he believes strongly against climate change and that he's a denier. It's because he is paid to be a kind of media soundbite person to give a compelling speech. And they place people like him on biased news platforms and give him all of their airtime in order to try and convince people. Because if you hear someone who's shouting very loud for a very long time about one thing, the longer you listen to it, the more it starts to become true. So this is a common tactic that's used by deniers and these big corporations in order to convince you that climate change is not happening and that it's not real.
And they often pit people like Marc Morano, who are trained professionals when it comes to public speaking, against scientists, people who believe in the facts and aren't, their rhetoric isn't persuasive rhetoric, it is factual rhetoric. So when you hear them talk against somebody who is using these persuasive phrases and who's trying to appeal to the masses,
I think it's easy to agree with people like Marc Milano, and I don't blame people for believing in his rhetoric because that's his job. And I don't think that people are stupid or ignorant to be persuaded by the language that him and people like him, funded by these fossil fuel companies, are using.
A tactic that they use is they want you to feel small, like you don't have an impact, and that people can't do anything and that they can't change the government. When you look at the Cato Institute website and their opinions on climate change, they say they do believe in climate change, but they believe that it's the individual's responsibility to take action rather than the government's. And I think what we need to do as climate change activists is be able to look beyond that and understand that you have power as an individual to not only appeal to your government, but also to make personal changes in your day-to-day life. But the changes that are going to be made that are going to have the biggest impact on climate change are changes on a governmental level or changes within corporations to make more positive influences on the environment. And those are going to happen through legislation and governmental action, whether or not you believe whether or not climate change is real. We can all agree that, the government has a lot of power, and our job as citizens is to vote people into office who hold these climate change beliefs and who are going to make positive influences on our climate change policy in the US.
An important thing about being an educated consumer and being able to make your own decisions is considering these news sites and the think tanks very carefully. We know that, as we said before, the think tanks and the media spin doctors are paid to say these things, regardless of whether or not they believe them or if they believe that they're smart decisions. They're paid by fossil fuel corporations, by oil companies, to make these statements, and they just want you to blindly believe them. They're not looking out for your benefit, and they're really only looking out for their investors. So it's really important to look for reputable news sources, particularly looking at several news sources. So looking at unbiased sites, or maybe not the first site that pops up in Google, but looking at several sites to see what the consensus is on a discussion. In addition, watching free programs on the news, even if you don't have a cable subscription, you can log online and see lots of news companies broadcasting their presentations and segments online for free. In addition, there's social media accounts that you can use. So, people always say to be wary of social media and don't trust everything you see. That is true, but if you go online, you can find a lot of big news sites' Twitter pages, and they have links to segments that are filmed verbatim just from television, and they post them online. So you can still find lots of good information to make you more educated on making important decisions as an individual and as a person.
Yeah, I think it can be hard to feel like you are consuming enough news, and often what the reputable news that's out there can be something that requires a subscription or costs money. But often these sources that are maybe less reputable are free for the public because they can be funded by these big corporations. They don't need your money, but they do need your voice, and they do need your ears, and for you to listen to what they have to say. So I think the better perspective is to look at the sources on a document. Often they'll be cited at the bottom, and then find out where those came from. Are they coming from reputable scientific journals? Are they coming from these corporations? And getting an understanding of what are the biases of the news that you're consuming. So another argument that they make is that we need to work as ordinary people, not as corporations, and work to create a better society for us and not for business. And this kind of has to do with what I was talking about before about governmental action and how corporations don't want you to make greener business decisions, especially if they're not a greener business. And part of your responsibility, again, as a climate change activist, as somebody who believes in climate change, is to find out which corporations are working towards greener business, and which small businesses you can support that are making greener decisions, and supporting those businesses and helping them profit.
And this leads nicely into our last segment, which is our little doses of hope, where we try and help people with small decisions that they can make in helping climate change and trying to push legislature that can help and fight against climate change. What we want to focus on is calling your legislature, as we've said several times in this episode. We want to call your senator, call your congressman or congresswoman, and contact these people and ask them what their policies are on climate change, and ask them to change policies or update them to better support what the public in the area thinks. And I know people don't believe that sending in letters or calling government figures is not going to work, but in fact, in the past, it has. A perfect example is the Cochabamba water wars in Bolivia. Pretty much the short of the story is the city privatized municipal water. So it was illegal to use any water at all, even rainwater, unless you paid a huge fee that was often 3/4 or more of any citizen's paycheck. So it was impossible for them to get access to any water at all. And the citizens protested against this and protested against the city, saying that this is unfair and that this shouldn't be allowed. And they actually won. They won access to their water, and they now have the city government controlling the water instead, so that they can change the prices and make decisions as citizens controlling their own government, as opposed to a corporation controlling their water supply and controlling the country.
And I think another part that goes with this is not only can you protest, not only can you call into your senator or send letters, but part of changing the rhetoric around this conversation involves just having discussions with people who don't agree with you. And this doesn't have to just be with climate change. I think that in our day and age and with social media, we can often be very aggressive in arguments and shut other people down for their beliefs. But I think it's important as an individual to be able to have those conversations with people who don't agree with you in a productive way, in a positive way, and be able to have an argument without it becoming a toxic space.
So thank you for listening, and I hope you're having a wonderful day.